It is said that St. Francis of Assisi one day entered the dining room in the monastery where he lived with his friars or brothers. And he saw his brothers eating a lavish meal, forgetful of those who were poor. So Francis approached the table, took the plate of food, mixed it with ashes, sat on the floor, and proceeded to have a meal. Now, it was meant to teach those at the table a powerful lesson about humility. And they all were called to live a humble life. Now, today's readings seem to carry that theme. Now, in today's gospel, Jesus shares a meal with his critics. And how do we know that they are his critics? Well, Luke tells us. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees. And the people there were observing him carefully. They were watching. And you kind of get a sense that that's not a friendly crowd. And Jesus tells them a parable. And the reason for the parable is this. Luke continues. He told a parable to those who were invited, noticing, and here we have the reason, how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. Now, in fact, it looks like Jesus tells two parables, not just one. One to the crowd that was invited, and toward the end, one to the host who invited him. Now, both parables have to do with what biblical scholars call the table fellowship. That is to say, with who eats with whom at the table, who sits next to whom at the table. Now, in the early Christian communities in the time of Luke, when he wrote the gospel, Jews and Gentiles, slaves and free, men and women, poor and rich, high and low, all gathered together at the table to share a meal. So, who sits where and next to whom naturally would become, at one point, an issue. And Jesus invites his followers to let go of status, prestige, power gains, and to embrace humility. To embrace humility. Put others first. And he summarizes this teaching with this rather memorable phrase. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. That is to say, don't make yourself the center of attention, the most important person in the room. Rather, be humble. People sometimes say something like this: life is not about you. Life is not about you. And I think that is another way to look at today's gospel and the idea of humility. You know, we all know what a blessing it is to have people in your life and in my life who live by this principle. Life is not about me. We know what a blessing they are, and we admire them in our lives. But we also know how challenging people who think it is all about them can be. Now, this is not anything new, this idea of humility. You find it in the Bible all over the place. You know, 200 years before Jesus walked the region of Galilee and preached, it was Sirach who actually speaks of humility in today's first reading. And you have this wisdom teacher. And this wisdom teacher is instructing a child in the ways of humility. And this is what he has to say. And that's our first reading. My child, conduct your affairs with humility, and you will be loved more than a giver of gifts. Humble yourself, the more, the greater you are, and you will find favor with God. And now we move to the host of the dinner, who seems to face a different challenge, though you'll see that the theme of humility still continues. And the challenge is this: whom to invite to the banquet? If you throw a banquet, whom are you to invite? And this is what Jesus has to say to him. When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, in the time of Jesus, you invited those who could and would, in fact, invite you in return. You never invited poor people because they were in no position to invite you and return the favor. That was how it worked in that society in Jesus' time. But again, the underlying principle here is the same. What is there for me? How will I benefit from inviting you? So again, it is all about me. Now, to those who listen to Jesus' words, the list of people who should be invited that Jesus proposes would be unthinkable, unacceptable. The poor, the lame, the blind, the crippled, they would never repay you. So in Jesus' mind, everyone is welcomed. It is not just about me or you or anyone. I would like to suggest this for your consideration. It seems to me that this attitude, it's all about me, which is the opposite of humility, that this attitude is, in fact, the original sin that leads to all other sins and gets us in trouble. Look at the book of Genesis, and let's conclude with this. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 3, we have the story of the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve eat from the tree after the snake speaks to them. And this is what we read. But the snake said to the woman, actually, I think the snake said this not just to the woman, but to the man as well, because he was standing right there. But for one reason or another, that's not how it is narrated. But the snake said to the woman, "You certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods who know good and evil." So, what they want to be like God. Again, it's all about them and what they want. They want what God has. Maybe it's all about me attitude is the original sin that leads us to all sorts of troubles. It's actually interesting that the word human and the word humility come from the same root, humus, which means the earth, the soil. Accidentally, the name Adam means exactly the same. It comes from the Hebrew word adamah, which means soil, ground, the earth. So maybe the fact that these two words, human and humility, have the same Latin root reminds us, or is meant to remind us, that in order to become truly human, we have to embrace humility. It just occurred to me that maybe, in fact, lack of humility is the original and the first sin that we find in the Bible. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus speaks so much about humility because it is the best cure. Well, I don't know. What do you think?